First things first, it's ad time, and man, do I have an exciting announcement this week. Beyond Solitaire is proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations, and they have an awesome new initiative that just dropped. They are teaming up with Gen Con and with professional game designers to offer online courses about game design. Take one just for fun, or take three to get a certificate in applied game design from Central Michigan University and Gen Con. How cool is that? The first course, The Art of Game Crafting for your classroom, boardroom, or game night, will be led by Aloy Lasanta of Third Eye Games and will run from May 24th to June 30th. It's designed to help you create your own role-playing games tailored to your own needs at work, home, or on game night. Check out the link in the show notes to learn more and maybe register for the class. Let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm very happy to have two special guests on the pod this week. I have Joe Schmidt and Taylor Shuss. They are game designers who have created a new game that's in development called The Sacred Band. So do y'all want to introduce to us what that's going to be?
Yeah, take it away, Taylor.
So The Sacred Band is a game Joe and I are working on. It's a fully cooperative two-player light deck building game. You have mirrored decks with you and your partner. That's what the other player is called. And you're playing kind of as the Sacred Band of Thebes, expanding your hegemony, and depending on what your win condition is, you're kind of going through ancient Greece, fighting the Spartans, maybe the Macedonians, et cetera, et cetera. The game's all about partnership and kind of getting in sync with your partner. Because ideally, when you're fighting forces, you want to match cards as well as possible. When you match cards, you know they're better. You get cool effects, and you always gain arrows, which is a shared resource that you and your partner have. And while not a lot is known specifically about the Sacred Band, like not a lot of details, we've taken a lot of what we do know, or is speculated on, and tried to integrate that as well as possible into the game.
Nice. So let's dig down a little deeper into that. So we're talking about partnership and about Eros and about, the Sacred Band trying to expand its hegemony, but the Sacred Band is a squad, I guess, of 150 pairs of male lovers. Mm-hmm. So Joe, do you want to give us some of the history behind that? I know that you're a history buff in this crew.
I would love to. Yeah, it's a super fascinating history. So essentially, we're talking 370, 380 BCE. This is after the Peloponnesian War, which was a very long conflict, a lot of chaos and death and everything. But at the end, Sparta comes out on top, but Sparta's hegemony is starting to fall a bit, and they're stretched out a bit too thin. They've lost a lot of people in their population after the war. So there's the opportunity for Thebes, which is a city-state in central Greece, to rise up and take power. A part of that was their decision that they needed something similar to the Spartan 300. And there's evidence that you can see about a lot of these 300, these elite units for pretty much all the city-states who were like the best of the best hoplites, and for whatever reason they picked them and they would fight. So Thebes realized that they needed to really refine this, and they were thinking about a lot of these concepts around eros, which is a term for passionate erotic love. And the idea that if you had two people who really loved each other and were in love and, made love, that a part of that would be that if they were fighting together, they would, two things, they would support each other and not want to see their partner die, but also they would be so ashamed to be embarrassed in front of their partner in a moment like that, that they would fight even harder. So essentially you're using these human relationships to create these superhero fighters. And that's essentially what they were. The Sacred Band from their founding won a couple major battles against the Spartans and continued to win major battles and were very critical for the growth of the Theban hegemony, the empire, up until some guy named Alexander comes down to central Greece with his dad and his fancy horsemen and kills the entire Sacred Band to a person. So it's this incredible history of this group. That is one of the things that I love about the history, is that we're taught so much from a very young age to look at the Spartan 300 as this ideal of manliness, especially being a white cis man. Like for me, like, oh, you should be like the Spartans, and 300 comes out in the comics, and like Molan Labe and all of these terms that just get thrown out that people don't really like think about so much. It's fascinating to have that turned on its head, but to show people who were equally, if not more successful, who were homosexual. And it's that, and it's the normalization for me in society of people of all types, and that queerness isn't something that's going to prevent anybody from succeeding. In fact, in this case, it was this shared passion they had for one another that drove them forward. So it's a fascinating history. There's a book by a professor called James Romm called The Sacred Band, that we read about this, and it's kind of a funny story. So Taylor, I've known for some time now through design work, and Taylor made this great game called Stonewall Uprising that's coming out soon. That if you've listened to this podcast or watched these videos, you've heard of and seen before, from Catastrophe Games. And we have these weekly meetings that we would get on, and we would talk about game design and all that stuff. And I'd always wanted to work with Taylor after playing Stonewall, because it was a really, evocative, moving experience for me. When I played it, I really loved it. So I said, okay, we're going to make a game, and we're going to make a game about the Theban Sacred Band. So I said, you have to buy this book. Go online, find it however you want, local bookstore, order the book, read it, and then we're going to talk. So we did. Taylor got it, read the book, wasn't the biggest fan, but still, like, comparatively for a rather thick history, it reads pretty well. And it all went from there. So it was kind of this history that I'd known about, but I'd learned more about through reading this book and then kind of diving into it. Just this perfect foil for the Spartan 300. And whenever you're designing games around history, you're always looking for great stories. And for me, this is just such a great story.
That's fantastic. So Taylor, I know that you wanted to create a real sense of partnership in this game. But I think that it would be easy to be like, oh yeah, we're just playing as a team, we're partners. How do you mechanically get from, oh yeah, we're partners, to partners in a way that makes it really explicit, like what this game is about and who this game is about?
So, I mean, there's a number of ways that and Joe and I, really, not just I, right? It's collaboration. My partner, Joe, who I worked on the game with, we tried a lot of things to make it clear you're working together, and it's not like, oh, I can kind of ignore my partner and just kind of go on my own. You need to work together, right? You're playing as the Sacred Band. You can't just run off in the other direction or something and do well. The first of which is, again, you have a mirrored deck with your partner, and when you play the same card, the values are additive. So, and a lot of times, like a 2 or whatever is a decent hit. But if you play both of them, they're additive. That's a 4. That's huge. You're getting Eros. Eros is a shared resource that you and your partner have and can spend to communicate information in the field of battle. Normally, you can't like talk about your hands. It's you're fighting. You can't be like, hey, so we should do the shield attack now. That's a good idea. But, when you spend arrows, it allows you to communicate because you know each other so well. And then on top of that, when you were recruiting new members to the Sacred Band, you're getting new cards into your decks, what it is mechanically speaking. There are prerequisites for which suits you have to be playing. And you and your partner, the higher the card you want, the more you have to work together, the more suits you'll need. So those were some of the big ways we did it. But I mean, having the kind of mechanical, like almost the Mind style gameplay, but paired with the deck builder, like a cooperative game that's pretty savage. It can be pretty savage. Mm-hmm. I think really evokes that too. It really tells the player, this is do or die. we are on a team. We need to do it right now. So I'd say those were the big ways that jumped to my mind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Joe, anything to add?
I think the big thing in thinking about kind of the partnership between the two players is there is this classic kind of view that people have of a cooperative game being quarterbacked by one person, and that one person driving everything about the gameplay and driving the narrative and being kind of overpowering at times in the way that they play, so that through all the stuff that Taylor was mentioning, and making sure that people really aren't communicating, that it's those kind of like those little hints that you can give because you can't quite say what you have. You can play your Eros tokens that show this affection, that kind of share these things. But it's like, I think of with my wife and myself, if our kids are running around somewhere, we can kind of look at each other and get a feel for exactly what it is. Like that's what we wanted to represent in the game, that bond, that closeness that people have. And also, talking about hoplite warfare, it was very important that you trusted the person next to you because they were holding the shield that was protecting your weak side. And then with their other hand, they were using their spear to kind of fight off the enemy. And amidst kind of the push and the clash of shields and spears, it was important to have that connection with the person next to you and that level of trust. So, when thinking about these games and these types of designs, you want to try to model as much as you can what it felt like in the moment for the people. And of course, nobody's wearing sandals and holding a shield and a spear. But if you can kind of replicate that and give people an idea of what that felt like, then they can better understand the situations that people went through in the history. And I think that especially with this topic, with all topics in history, but especially in kind of undergamed or underrepresented topics, the history is sacred. Because we're talking about the lives of real people who suffered and died and went through horrendous things. And it's our responsibility as designers choosing to use that history to make sure that we give it due diligence and that we also give it the respect that it requires, and making sure that people understand that the decisions they're making and all the things they're doing are things that were done by humans before, not just kind of a story, but real people experience these things.
So in the playtesting you've done so far, have you found that people who play this game together a lot do end up kind of mind melding a little bit and ending up more in sync with each other? Because I can see you playing this game with somebody that maybe you don't mind meld with very well. But I'm curious about how that works as you continue to play.
So it was funny kind of with Taylor and I, when we play this, it starts to click. And one of the funny things about game design is you'll get moments where you're really frustrated with the other person because you want something or they don't want something. There's a real partnership there, but we'll play the game together and might be off a little bit, but then you start clicking. And then that's what we've seen in the other play tests that you have as well. It's really incredible to see that because your success is driven by you working together, that it does drive people to play. Now, we haven't expanded out playtest on a far scope yet. We're kind of still doing internal testing, but I'm fascinated to see what it would be like if you have people who maybe aren't best friends or aren't close or aren't doing these things. Like, what would their reactions be and how would they vibe off each other? And could this be the type of interaction that creates a friendship? Like, I think that there are a lot of really cool elements of that.
So I'm also thinking about this just with a lot of interest. So, I mean, this is my experience as a woman growing up and being educated here in the United States. I feel like most of the books, for example, that I read in school, or most of the movies that I watched, I was sort of asked to identify with protagonists who were not like me. Like when I was little, I wanted to be Indiana Jones, or, I wanted to be Batman, not Batgirl. And it had nothing to do with gender, right? It was that I wanted to be the main character. I wanted main character energy.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And, I'm really curious, what responses have you gotten so far to asking players to enter roles that they maybe do not commonly step into, or that maybe they wouldn't in their own lives. I mean, what experiences have you had so far having players playtest this game like in the role of a gay couple fighting a battle?
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm gonna take a step back for a moment and say, when I made Stonewall, I asked players to step into some awkward roles on occasion, and I was surprised at players got uncomfortable, and that helped like prove part of the game's point in a lot of ways. I'm like, see, this you should feel bad for what's going on. Maybe think about that. And with this game, I feel like I'm doing it in a much more of like a almost like setting a role model, right? Where you're giving people these this group to look up to and to see as a role model. Players by and large that I've played with, again, we're really internally testing. It's not like a wide group yet. But the people we've tested with, the people I've talked to, they can sympathize, they can understand. I think it probably helps for a lot of people, regardless of orientation or any of that jazz. At the end of the day, the fact that you're male lovers, there's no cards that like specifically talk about that. There's Eros, and people have loose understanding of what Eros really is, which I find pretty funny.
Yes,
But
the word erotic comes from it for those of you who are out there.
yeah. And so what that means is, people sympathize, but for a lot of people, if they want to focus on just the combat or all that, they can, right? They understand what's going on. Right now, we just have Greek letters for our sacred band members. It's like, Gamma and Gamma are our partners, because that's simple, and then people get the same name. In a real printed version, like on a store shelf, ideally there'd be art of like two separate men or something, and it would be like, oh, these are the partners. This is this, maybe they're alliterative names or whatever that would end up being. But and I suspect that would help people empathize further, because then it would give them like a mental image of who is in their version of the sacred band. And I think that would help a lot and clean that up, and also give people a clear image of what's going on, I think. But I have had no issues with it. I have had no playtesters be like, oh, I'm playing a gay guy. It's like that'd be a weird thing to hear, I think.
But and I think, Liz, you speak to a greater point too, which is the fact that women are underrepresented in history, because the like 50-50 split of population has always been people who are people who identify as women and people who identify as men. So I think we miss out on that a lot, and making sure that we find ways to represent that is really important. In the story that we told, or that we're telling through the Sacred Band, unfortunately, we don't have that ability. But it's still like, the way I saw this when I was really thinking about this concept and this idea of what you want to do is that, okay, this is, a part of a step in the right direction. That ideally, from my perspective, when I look at like queer history and queer game design, it's moving things forward, and it's putting things in that position. And then, you have things like the Zenobia Award, and you have other great designers out there who are really pushing the boundaries and, making us really think about the decisions and things that we're doing. Those are all getting us there, so unfortunately, like, while the Sacred Band isn't answering all the questions, it's trying to shift the conversation, which is, I think, the most important thing right now for game designers, specifically historical game designers, to be thinking about, at least in the proper use of pronouns and stuff like that in their rule books and stuff. That we want to allow people to be a part of the narrative of the history, whatever that history may be. And that the important thing is that even though you're taking on a role, you're still included. Like, we're trying to be as inclusive to everybody as we can be who inhibits these roles. Like, I think about it, a lot from the perspective of kind of like theater and movies and things like that, that you have these roles, and just because there's a role doesn't mean it can't be played by anybody. And some of the most powerful experiences you get at the theater are when you see people who play a role that may traditionally be gendered male, and they're not, and that's really compelling, and that tells the story in a fascinating new way. So yeah, I think just leaning into that creativity, but then also like moving things forward so that we get more stories. I have twin 8-year-old daughters who will always call out whenever they can when they don't see women in something, which I love about them, and I love that it kind of checks me and my privilege. It makes me think about things. So yeah, personally, for me, in my future projects, I have some things cooking, but I would love to focus more on that and give more of those stories. But specifically with this, the idea is just to kind of get the ball rolling and keep moving it forward, and giving more people opportunity to be themselves in games, and then ideally be part of the process of creating new games that tell their own stories.
Yeah, I think what's most interesting about this project for me, other than the history part, which will always take precedence, can't help it, is that I love that we're starting to see more games that give us like more shoes to step into, if that makes sense. Like, not the same pair again and again, like just maybe like a different color, or like the shoelaces are different, like totally different. So one thing I also found really interesting about what you said earlier too is talking about the Sacred Band as role models and as heroes. So I have not done extensive research on this particular period in history. Like, I know the basics, but I will say, as a Latin teacher, I really shy from presenting the Romans as heroic, mainly because they were genocidal and problematic in so many ways. So when you say that you want to present the Sacred Band as role models, are you picking and choosing which parts? Is it that the history is murky enough that there aren't aspects that need to go to the background for that to work? Or is it just a matter of people being able to see themselves in sort of a fighting scenario where our macho culture normally would rule them out?
I mean, I think for me, it's an alternative story. Like we were talking earlier about the 300 and how, the Sacred Band is an amazing foil, just a perfect foil in so many ways to what's going on there, right? And yes, part of it is the fact that because the history is murky enough, we know they won a lot of battles, most notably the Battle of Leuctra against the Spartans and whatnot. But at the end of the day, they did a great job fighting for Thebes, and they were one of the few places at the time where you could live with your partner, regardless of gender. In Sparta at the time, it was kind of not. It was a bit frowned upon at that moment in history. And in Athens, you could be with a partner, but you couldn't really live with them. You were expected to get married to a woman, and so it's really the fact that, like, they were an anomaly even in Greece at that moment, and they did such great things, and a lot of people really did not like them. I mean, it's my understanding, and Joe can comment on this, but historians even of the time and way further out were very dismissive of the Sacred Band.
Yeah.
And basically, like, future historians said, like, oh, this is their love for their wives, and ones at the time talked about how what they were doing couldn't work, but clearly it did.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a fascinating question and an important point to put out there. We can't shy away from all of the history, when we do this, and that's kind of the fascinating aspect of the study of this, and specifically thing I think about a lot in design, which is a term called historiography, which is the study of history. So kind of progressing over time, how our view of this history changes. So first off, we don't have a ton of sources on what actually happened in this time period. We have some that are more biased. I think Xenophon comes to mind for me as somebody who hated Thebes, like didn't even mention it all that often in his writing. So if you're just reading Xenophon and that's the that's the idea you get of this time period. It's, very different. Were the Thebans looking to build an empire, the Boeotians, their league? Yes, they were most definitely power hungry, looking to consolidate and build things. Did they do good things? Yes, like one of the big things they did was they kind of, by breaking the back of the Spartan hegemony, they ended the process of helotry, which was an awful type of slavery. Now, they didn't end all slavery, but they ended this one specific type wherein all of these people from this area were enslaved and were forced to work to feed the Spartans and the people who lived around the Spartan, the main areas of Laconia where the Spartans lived. So they stopped that. They focused on independence, but it was really independence from Sparta, less independence from themselves. But in the end, while we look at history and while we can see people for who they were through our own lens, it's also important to some extent to understand the way they behaved in their own time. And that doesn't excuse people's behavior, but it shows the progress forward that people made. And in Plutarch, I was reading that today before this, he wrote these things called the parallel lives, where he would compare a Roman and a famous Greek individual and talk about them, kind of because the Romans loved talking about the Greeks and then comparing themselves to Greeks and all that. So in this, he writes about Pelopidas, who was one of the main leaders. The other one was Epaminondas, and apparently he wrote something about Epaminondas, but it's lost forever, so nobody has it, but he kind of references it in his work. So with in writing about Pelopidas, he talks specifically about how all the people of Greece, of Hellas, looked to Thebes as an example of kind of liberty. So in that moment, were they the good guys? I think you could say so. Were they also bad? Like, yeah, they had slaves, and there were things they did that weren't great, that were awful. But when we're talking about a society where you see, like I was saying earlier, the Molon Labe, the Come and Take It, Spartan stickers, Spartan marathons. In the Spartan marathon thing, I've never done one, but I know that there's part of it called the Crypteia. I think it's like a part of the club or something in it. And the Crypteia was essentially a group of young Spartans who would go out and hunt down Helots, who were these slaves, and kill them. So like there are parts of this that we give honorifics to, and I might be speaking out of turn on the Crypteia thing. I think I read it somewhere, but like we honor a lot of really bad stuff in ancient society, even though not everybody was good. This story of the Sacred Band is a good story to tell because it gives agency to people who are queer, who can associate themselves with somebody in a world where otherwise they felt like they couldn't. And that's what I was listening to a video with Mary Beard the other day, and she was talking about this specifically, how like the reason we study ancient history is because we're still finding parts of ourselves in it. And that, not all great, not all good, some evil, but there's parts of this that I would love for a young kid to be able to see themselves in.
That's interesting. Oh, just a note for those of you out there. I'm not gonna get us bogged down on it now, but Mary Beard is having her sort of own sort of J.K. Rowling moment right now.
Oh,
where she's been a bit turfy in the last couple of years.
Oh man, that's right.
So hit the pause button if you want to take that Mary Beard.
No. I mean, because how would you know? We all have to figure out how to relate to history. She's the most accessible, popular historian for Rome right now.
I did not know that.
That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't unless you're like a classics person who follows her Twitter and follows everything, so
yeah.
It's interesting. We're representing ourselves. We're still having this, we're looking for ourselves in history. We're still having some of the same problems now.
Totally.
And every single one of us is on kind of like a journey to figure out who to identify with and how do we talk about it? How do we talk about ourselves? And I see history as like the perfect vehicle for that because it's far enough away that we don't necessarily personally attach to it, but it's still close enough because we're all human where we can look for ourselves in ways that feel a little more safe.
Yeah, that's, I mean, like that's a moment in action right there of learning something, understanding it, and then saying, okay, like this is something I need to focus on more. This is an understanding I need to have, which I think is, the foundation of a lot of the important movement in anything that involves history. Movies, any media or medium that involves history needs to ask itself these questions, because even though there are things that we expect to know are true, it's not always the case, and that we really have to think about that.
Yeah, like you have to look at history and then you have to look at yourself at the same time, or else it's not a complete historical moment, I guess, for me. Like the
Yeah.
study, it's a meditative study as well as just a factual one.
No, that's
So
fascinating. Yeah, thank you.
one thing that's really interesting though is that, so I know from pre-chat that this game, you had originally proposed maybe doing a game about Achilles and Patroclus.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an idea that didn't quite work out. So what made that idea less successful and the sacred band something that you were more interested in?
Yeah, I think that really came from the fact that we ran across this Rom book, The Sacred Band, and started reading on it. And I think it represented a couple things for me. First off, it's an area of history that I have not seen in any game. Aside from the Sacred Band are in games. If you play Command and Colors, if you play Mark Herman's Peloponnesian War, if you play a variety of other things, Sacred Band are there, but they just have a combat buff. Like it's not telling their full story. It's giving them a +2 DRM or something like that. So that was an important part of it. And I think that it's also, from my perspective, I don't feel that I am well enough prepared to do anything involving like the Trojan War, because there's so much depth to the Iliad and the history and the buildup and the historiography. There's a lot more reading I would have to do to be able to understand that. I think for the Sacred Band, with Rom's book, with the primary source documents that are super easy to find online, we actually found there's a professor, Dr. Michael Furman, out of Florida State, who's called Prof. Boeotia on Twitter. And we were actually able to find and just kind of talk to and have a conversation. It's this person who loves Boeotian history and was very happy to talk to us about the game. So the resources were there in a way. And I think that, as a creative, sometimes a story just grabs onto you, grabs hold. And this had a tighter hold on me than the Achilles and Patroclus one. But that said, one day it's there. I'll make it because the Myrmidons are super cool, and more people should realize that Achilles and Patroclus were more than just best friends.
Yes, they are BFFs. A little more than that.
Well, yeah, that's funny.
Roommates, no kidding.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So oh god, I had a question. Yes. So one of the things that's interesting about this game though is it's all about partnership and it's about Eros. But this game also solos, and I'm already listening to all of the solo gamer jokes about this. So how's the solo part work?
So it's different. It's different in the same, and it's a big part of I love designing solo games and designing specifically solo games for existing systems. So there's a game called In the Shadows I designed with my friend Dan Bullock and Chris Bennett. Gunnar Holmbach has a game called The Weimar Republic that he designed, that I'm designing solo bots for. So for me, it's taking those component pieces and creating something oftentimes different, but using the same mechanic set, using the same component set. So a bit of a design experiment, but also a great way to kind of test through and understand like a combat system and the way things go. So in a solitaire version of this, you are not representing a pair of lovers in the Sacred Band. You're representing one of the leaders, one of the Boeotarchs of the Theban hegemony. And you're using the forces that you have in recruiting and losing throughout the course to do the same things, to gain to gain areas via campaign, to get your resources, to defeat the Spartans and the other city-states of Greece. The way that I modeled the Sacred Band in that is that they have a card that you'll always have that is super powerful, that is pretty much going to knock out any enemy it faces, but all the rest of the cards are normal. So the big thing there was creating the puzzle and telling that puzzly story, but also showing how important the Sacred Band were and how vital they were to the success of the Thebans in their growth. I actually played it last night and I lost. I keep losing, which I love when I play solo games, especially when I design them. But yeah, it's fun. And I think for me, it's fun to make sure that we're including, whenever we can, the ability for somebody to play with their friend and then somebody to play the game by themselves.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really excited to try it, not gonna lie. So one more kind of real talk question before we go into some softball stuff towards the end, which is, have you started pitching this to publishers yet? And what kind of response, if any, are you expecting? Because on the one hand, this sounds like a really super interesting game, and on the other, I can see people kind of trying to sideline it as a niche project. And what are your experiences so far, and what kind of conversations have y'all been having about that as you approach that point?
So we're in the early days for pitching when it comes to the Sacred Band. It's pretty early. We have talked with a few people already, and I think that the big things that we're noting are that we're obviously we can't change the theme. They're not gonna become roommates. Stop it. I'm not interested. I know the trick. And so there's that. Thankfully, the game is mechanically light enough that it's easy to rock. It's not like this 4-hour marathon thing. So it's pretty, I found it's pretty easy to get across what's going on. But the big thing is just having them understand how important what's going on historically and the kind of weight of that, but seeing those people in this game, and like you mentioned, having more shoes or more unique shoes to put yourself in, and making sure a potential publisher is on board for that. I'm not anticipating interested publishers having a big issue with that, but it's more a matter of finding the people who are really excited to be a part of that and getting them on board and having them be a part of that process. Because what Joe and I have made, I think we're really happy with, and it's not like done. Games are never done, yada yada.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of how, making sure that we have our say, and that the publisher's there and they help us along. But I think a lot of what our message is already in the game. And we just need to make sure that does not get taken out at any step in the process.
Yeah, it's a partnership that we need to find with a publisher, because the most important part of it is the history, and that when you design historical games, in doing that, at the same time, we're really pushing to find a publisher who gives us kind of a bit more sway in the market. And the big reason for that is I want more people to walk into stores and see queer games on the shelves. And I think that that's really important. And to know that one day, fingers crossed, some kid could walk into a store and see this game and be like, oh, I can play this with my friends, and it's something that relates to me in a way that other games don't. That's awesome. And it's history too. I love it. So giving people the ability to connect on that level is really, really important for me. And it's the reason I started designing, and I continue to design board games. This is not my full-time job. This is my passion. And for me, the drive is to tell these stories and to share history in a way that I've always wanted to ever since I was a kid, in a way I do with all the people in my life around me at their detriment at times. So it's I think that's really what I'm looking for, is somebody who wants to partner with us and who wants to put this in the hands of the people who it's going to make a difference in.
Beautiful. So, what are y'all playing for fun, if anything, right now? I mean, are you only playing your own stuff since y'all are both design heavy in your lives, or is there some other stuff that's been bringing joy?
I mean, I've been playtesting like normal. That's that's pretty bog standard. A couple of my own things. Recently, I got to try Micro Macro. That was quite fun. It's kind of like a Where's Waldo kind of game, and honestly, I was pretty surprised. I was joking that it's like the ultimate game to give someone who just loves puzzles, just like straight up puzzles. And I recently played the second Quacks expansion for the first time, and that was surprisingly good. I was worried, but yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that. That's what I've been up to.
Cool. I one of something beside the Sacred Band that's taking up a lot of my game table. I don't actually have a game table. I have a kitchen table, but I have to remove my games when dinner starts. It is a game I'm working on called Henry, the Agincourt Campaign, which is a levying campaign game by GMT. It's currently on P500. It's about the logistics of medieval campaigning and battling and telling the story of Agincourt as Shakespearean and historically accurate as I can. For fun, I played Pax Porfiriana for the first time the other day with some friends online. I really enjoyed that. I'm playing in a Shores of Tripoli tournament right now online, which is also equally fun. And then there's a game I like to play with my daughters called Magical Kitties. It's an RPG for kids.
Nice.
That I got them for Christmas. That's very fun. We call them story games, and I try to GM them as best I can, but normally they just go off the rails, which is really fun, but it's especially cute because they're cats. It's a lot of fun.
Kitties are magical.
That's pretty great. Yeah. I mean, all players go off the rails.
And then where can y'all be found online for people who are interested in following what you're up to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest place to find me is on Twitter. I use it most regularly. And my handle is @DrawnOnward, or you can type in Taylor Shuss there and find me pretty easily.
Cool. I am at Joseph N. Schmidt on Twitter, and then Corsair Joe, because I'm a big fan of Eldar Corsairs from Warhammer 40K on Board Game Geek.
Those of you who are watching or listening probably already know I can be found anywhere online as Beyond Solitaire. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on. This was a delightful conversation. I'm so excited about your game.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Like, subscribe, comment, and most of all, happy gaming.